Hello and welcome to another Rebel Coach conversation. Today we are so lucky that you are here because you are going to be in for a treat. I am Allison Nissen, co-founder of Rebel Coach, along with my sister, Marcy Stout, who is in the house with us today. We are honored to have Aileen Hale, our very special guest, and she has had quite an adventurous life. Aileen, tell me what you recommend that we should do at least once in our lifetimes.
Travel internationally. If you haven't done that, travel to as many countries as you can. That's a hard question to answer. Go scuba diving. Another one.
Go scuba. Right. Well, let me tell you, Aileen has had really an adventurous life, and you do this through multiple vehicles. But one of them is that you are, I'm not sure if you would call yourself an educational travel agent. How would you define your career?
Yeah, great question. So I'll go back a few years. I started in my 20s going to Quito, Ecuador to learn Spanish on an immersion program through Georgetown University. This is after college. And I ended up engaging in service work while I was down there. I actually studied French through all my high school and university career. And it wasn't until after college that I learned Spanish. So for those of you who don't think you can learn a language later in life, I can test that theory because you definitely can. I've learned Romanian and some Albanian in my 40s and 50s. So don't give up if you're learning another language. But so I started learning Spanish in my 20s and serving in the community as well as teaching at the university. And I didn't study to be an educator. It was kind of serendipitous. After the university, I had studied international relations at undergrad and worked in DC. And I never really thought about being in education until I started teaching in Quito, Ecuador, because I was a native speaker and engaging in service. So I found a real love for teaching through that experience, and then came back to the States to get trained as a teacher of English as a second language. I've always worked with adults and worked a lot with refugees and immigrants, and also taught at universities. I taught at Boise State University and bilingual education. And now I'm in Florida, teaching at Florida State College of Jacksonville, as well as University of North Florida, again, in their adult ESL programs. But I've also had the opportunity to work a lot internationally and teach overseas. So through that, I've gained the opportunities of engaging people in working overseas as well. I started, when I was in Boise State University, I started taking groups of students to work in Belize as part of their educational studies. I say work, we would do a service project as part of the curriculum. So it wouldn't just be go do a study abroad program, but engage in the community while you're doing your either a study abroad or a short-term 10-day spring break trip. I always engage students in service as part of the project of learning about the language and culture.
I love it. And I will say, so I'm in the house with two professors, so I can just say from the student perspective, there's nothing better than the teacher that has the experience that can bring the classroom, make it alive, like whether it's like through the actual experience of taking the trips or because you've been there. So that's amazing. I love that story.
Thanks.
So I'd love to ask, as you got started, like where you are now. So I know you're still teaching, but you're also, you've started this podcast to inspire people to explore the world, but doing it with a purpose and having, getting more out of it than just the tourist portion of the travel. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I just recently started this in this year, 2023. Because I felt like I have done a lot of taking groups to do service projects in other countries, from Dominican Republic to Belize and Cuba, different countries around the world, as well as even Moldova, Eastern Europe. But I felt like I'm not always able to go on these trips with people. So as I got more and more into podcasting, which I got into and learned about, took a course on during COVID, I realized I really liked the whole process of learning about podcasting and thought, why not start my own and share ideas with other travelers that might not otherwise think of incorporating service as part of their trip. Because I think a lot of people, you go on vacation, but you don't think of like, well, what kind of service could I do in a short, if I'm only going for a week to Belize, how am I going to do a service project? But for example, a friend of mine went with she took her kids on a school project And I connected them with a nonprofit organization, which is helping girls that come out of a shelter just for an afternoon school project. Or when my friend from Florida went to Cuba, I helped them bring educational supplies to a school in Cuba as part of a service project. So it doesn't have to be, a whole week-long project. It could be an afternoon project. It could be even delivering medical supplies. For example, in Cuba, there's a huge need for medical supplies. I have a very dear friend right now whose father is in the hospital and they can't even get basic Advil painkillers and he's in severe pain and things like that. So like taking an extra suitcase of over-the-counter medicines is a huge service. So simple things like that, as well as more engaged, depending on what people like to do. I try to design according to people's age and interests and types of service they may want to engage in as part of their service trip.
And Aileen, how do you find the service projects that you are able to connect people with?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been years of experience in these different countries. I seek them out. So my podcast is called Travel with Purpose. The intention is to discover nonprofit organizations working in these different countries. So I've been going to Belize for over 10 years and taking groups to do different service projects. We used to work inland in the schools doing literacy projects, but more recently I've been working out on the islands where some people say, oh, people are just going to do their island time and not want to do any service project. But there's even greater needs, honestly, in the islands because they have less resources. It's a lot harder for them to get things from the mainland out on the island, even though it's more beautiful and you have the reef and all those great things. But there are a lot of very important needs that the local people have on the islands, again, that are more expensive and difficult to obtain, like even educational supplies, bilingual books, those kind of things. So to answer your question, I go out, I research them and discover them. And honestly, it's like a little treasure hunt for me because one thing leads to another. Somebody else tells me about, like when I was doing a dive, somebody said, well, do you know this woman who's doing this conservation reef project? So somebody tells me about somebody else and I follow the thread, follow the lead, and I look up the nonprofit and I often end up doing interviews with the leaders of the nonprofit organizations.
That's
so build
wonderful.
relationships and connections. Yeah.
And then I understand through your, so I know you have the podcast, and then on top of that, one of our good friends, she's experienced this with, hiring your services, but from my understanding, you also work with families, helping them find the actual service projects and help setting them up. Can you just tell us if one of our listeners wants to learn more about how you work with families or small groups, even like school projects, I think you've done as well. So can you share a little bit more about how you do that for a family?
Yeah, definitely. So I just have a meeting one-on-one, usually with one person from the family, whether it's the mother or the father, or whoever wants to be the representative. And I usually do a intake call, if you will, for half an hour to an hour to discovery of how many people are in the family, if it's a family going or a women's retreat or that kind of thing. How many women do you have going or kids do you have on your trip? To assess who is going, what their ages are, what type of activities they'd like to do. As well, for excursions, I always love to incorporate excursions as well as the type of service projects they might be interested in doing, whether it might be an educational project, whether it might be a conservation environmental project, like I said, a literacy or a medical project. So depending on the people's interests and needs, like that one family from Jacksonville, the father was a doctor, so they were really interested in a medical project but the kids wanted to do something educationally. So we actually combined the two of those projects for them. So again, it's very customized to meet the needs of the people that are going on the trip and make it as meaningful for them to engage in what they're interested in personally and professionally.
And do you start from scratch with families and you help them find like the hotels and the everything, or do they kind of have a little bit of itinerary, like we're going here, can you help us find something?
Yeah, great question. Most often it's starting from scratch because most people, in the case of, I would say both Cuba and Belize, most people haven't been there before, so they don't really know where they want to go per se. But I mean, they might say, oh, I want to go to Havana, Cuba, because everybody knows Havana. But I would suggest, well, do you know Trinidad? Do you know Viñales, these other cities outside of Havana that are amazingly beautiful to visit and see? So they would come to me and say, yeah, I want to go for a week or 10 days. That's part of the equation too, to how much time they have. And then I suggest a number of different places to visit. And based on, we just have a, like I said, kind of an intake. They say, yes, that really interests me, or no, I'm not so interested in the mountains. Do you want the ocean? Do you want the mountains? Do you want a combination of these things? So it's basically starting with zero and customizing it as they go. Or if they know they want to, spend 5 days in Havana. Sorry.
We couldn't hear anything, but sounds like somebody's there. So what I've heard about her trips before is, and our friends that when she went to Cuba, there's so much about learning the local culture, and there's things you may not know, like the unwritten do's and don'ts from the non-tourist perspective of how to respect the culture, work with like whatever the local priorities, and that's what Aileen really kind of curates this great trip.
Yeah, and if people want to go for a longer time, some people want to stay for 2 weeks or 3 weeks and do like a Spanish immersion even. I can help set up a Spanish immersion project. A lot of people are interested in that. And or retreats. So Marcy, for example, connected me with some of her friends who she'd done a retreat with before, a group called Murmurations that does international retreats for leadership and entrepreneurial women. And I am now in touch with them, and we're hoping to design a project to take a women's retreat in Belize. So what I would do is do all the logistics. They can do their curriculum, what they want to do with the leadership part of it. And I facilitate the lodging, like you say, and the places where they might want to eat, or if we do all inclusive, those kind of things, if they want to have time to go paddleboarding and snorkeling. So I do all the side things, and they can focus on what their expertise is which the leadership training or coaching of women, for example.
Well, you're speaking my love language. I feel like these treats, like I have been to the Murmurations, and it's such a great organization. And then when you add that type of, curriculum with a beautiful island and some sort of local impact with, learning the culture a little bit more, it just almost hits on every cylinder of experiencing growth and learning and connection with others. So it's pretty amazing how you do that.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and it's fun, like you say, because it can enhance, they both enhance each other, right? Because I think to be able to do these excursions and things outside the curriculum builds on and gives people time and a place to think and meditate on the beauty around them as they process what they're learning.
So as you've gotten started on doing these types of works, what are you finding that's surprising to you? Like, give us a little insight to what it's like to set these stuff up that you're kind of pleasantly surprised by.
How one connection leads to another is actually a really pleasant surprise. So for the example, my friend here in Jacksonville connected me with you, Marcy, who then connected me with the women in Portland. And like the train, the little, like I call it a treasure hunt, is a great surprise, because I feel like there's always something around the corner I'm not expecting some amazing person to meet. Like I did a podcast interview. I was researching humanitarian organizations that are helping in Cuba for different types of projects. And I interviewed this one man who's doesn't live in Florida, but he has an organization called First Hand Aid to Cuba. They do a lot of humanitarian and medical supplies. But he, in turn, has literally helping with a family that I know in Viñales, a part of Cuba, that have real significant needs right now. So it's one of those things that, because I reach out to them, they're now giving back to this community in Cuba, apart from, doing a service project. So it's the connections that are built that are really exciting for me to be a part of, building connections and creating connections.
Can you tell me, Aileen, what has been the most rewarding service project that you've ever participated in?
That's a tough one. I guess when I used to a few years back do service projects in the mainland of Belize, and we would do literacy projects with the kids in the schools. Why I love that so much is because partially we would do 5 days in the school, so it was the longevity, and that doesn't sound that long, but for a 10-day trip, we would have excursions on the weekends before and after, but we'd have 5 solid days working with the kids in the schools. And you would see the real relationships and that would be built in a very short period of time from both sides, the people that are coming to serve and the people that are being served. And the projects we did were really fun for the kids. We created books with the children. We had a whole curriculum to how to design and create the books. So it was meaningful for everyone involved. I had people from literally 70-year-olds who came along to 15-year-olds, and everyone was like impacted in a different way, myself included, to see the impact of, we incorporated music and, like I said, the creation of books and photography and a lot of dynamic things to engage and to watch the relationships be built and how much people were impacted when they were leaving the country, when they were leaving one another, and tried to stay in touch. And a lot of people would come back as well. So I think that was probably one of the most meaningful ones that I've done recently.
And what was, when you first got started, so you immersed yourself in, where'd you say, Ecuador?
Yeah, when I was in my 20s, I did an immersion project in Ecuador. Yeah.
And that's how you got the bug, so to speak.
Right.
And then you've mentioned that you were also in different places in Europe. Have you been elsewhere? Where else have you been?
Yeah, I worked in Albania in 2019. I had a fellowship to teach English and do teacher training there. Again, as type of project we did, and I don't speak Albanian, but I tried to learn a little bit. It's one of the most challenging languages, but we did a service project in the community with the university students for taxi drivers that didn't speak English, but needed English for their international clientele. So we developed these bilingual booklets for the taxi drivers to have in their hands, their fingertips, that they could refer to when they get international visitors who speak English. Just simple things like that, but it was a fun project to do. So yes, I have contacts in Albania, Moldova, Romania, different parts of Eastern Europe. And this fall, I'm going to be working in Colombia. So I'm venturing into new territory. I've done work in Colombia, but I'm going to be in Cartagena for a longer term working at the university there. So if you want to follow me to Colombia, we'll have some new episodes with nonprofits I don't even know about yet, but I'll be researching and discovering them.
Allison, is your friend that we interviewed on the Tuesday too, was she Cartagena?
No, she was Manizales.
Well,
I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. I know it. But
we'll introduce you, Aileen, to another.
Up in the coffee country. Let's put it that way.
That would be great. I actually listened to that episode. That was great. I was like, where is that? I couldn't wait to find out.
And I'd also like to change gears and ask you questions about your work with refugees. So I know you have a volunteer passion and you've done some things, or tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I started working with refugees when I lived in Boise, Idaho, and I worked for a nonprofit organization that I developed the English language curriculum for the refugees to learn English in a short time, because they were required to learn English in a short time and get work within 6 months of being in the United States. So I helped develop some real hands-on curriculum for them to get their first job in America. Since then, I've worked with refugees. I teach English as a foreign language. So a lot of my students are either immigrants or refugees that have come to the United States. And I love working with them. They're the most engaged students because they really, really want to learn and need to learn English. And they're so grateful for what we can teach them and how we can build connections for them. I have students in my class right now from Afghanistan, Russia, Cuba, Venezuela, Colombia. I have quite a diverse group of students, actually in Vietnam and China, all in one class. So I just have a passion for working with students from around the world, because I always learn from them and feel like I can contribute in a meaningful way to their lives by helping even build connections with them, with Americans here in the United States.
Now, I have a quick technical question. So you start off, it was English as a second language, and now it's English as a foreign language. Is that a shift, or is it both?
It's both. So I know the terminology is confusing. I mean, so it's English as a second language when you're in like the United States, for example, and whoever is here learning English, oftentimes it's not their second language. It's actually kind of an American, like we would learn Spanish as a second language if English is our first language. But English is a foreign language when you're teaching in another country and it's a foreign language for them. But it's kind of a misnomer, because oftentimes English is a fourth language for many people, not as a second language, right?
Yes, I had a student once and I said, well, English is probably your second language. And she said, no, it's my fifth. And I thought, well, okay, then.
Exactly.
I felt woefully inadequate at that moment.
Right. Learned my lesson.
Yeah.
I do love it. And I love the idea of doing the projects, like if you have younger children doing the immersion, Because I feel like if they do want to learn a language, at least our experience here, the classroom learning where you dabble for 45 minutes, 5 days a week, it just doesn't really allow you to learn the dialect, you don't get the confidence of speaking. So do immersion, like, with younger kids or teenagers or, families that really want to learn the language. How do you bring that experience to life?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, we're looking at proposing a project for next summer of 2024 for anybody interested in Belize. There's a colleague of mine, she's a Belizean teacher. She does a camp for kids in Belize. So if you had young children anywhere, I say young, from anywhere from 12 to 18, I mean, it could be college students as well, but to work in her camp. So we come alongside her and help their children increase their English language literacy skills. At the same time, it's like a both and. We do like part-time and give our students the chance to practice Spanish. Belize, the official language of Belize is actually English because it's a British colony. However, 85-90% of people speak Spanish there because it's bordered with Guatemala and Mexico, and there's a lot of people that have immigrated from those two countries into Belize. So the places we are, there's a lot of Spanish speakers. And additionally, for people that want to do a total immersion project, we would have like 2 to 3 hours of immersion for them in the afternoon, depending on how much Spanish they would like to do. We have a lodge that we have done a lot of work with over the years, that they have a great facility with, kind of bunk bed style dorms for the kids and nicer accommodations for the parents. But you can come alongside. We've had parents come with their kids, and it has all like, the meals there. And then we go to the school during the day, and you can have an additional time in the afternoon for Spanish immersion with a teacher and practicing using the language with the kids in the community and or adults as well. Believe in immersion. Sorry.
Yeah, no, what I love about your work is, we always try to teach our kids, if your passion becomes your vocation, it'll never feel like work. And what you've done is you've really taken like your passion around travel, passion around teaching, passion around giving service, and all these things, and kind of put it into these really cool experiences. So I'm going to kind of try to sum it up a little bit, because I think when we ask for, if one of our members wants to reach out to you, I'd love for you to share your website, because the podcast is amazing. The fact that it's just inspiring traveling with a purpose, like thinking differently than just like, where can I lay on the beach? And then the work you do where somebody calls you, whether it's you calling as I'd like a family experience, or I know the one program you're mentioning with the Belize, it was actually a teenager, like she's a student government leader at our school, asking you for help, and she wants to do a service project. And that's, partly because she's passionate about it. It's also great, resume builder for college. And then you also do it if somebody, has a company like ours, or Murmurations, and wants to do these types of trips. Like Murmurations has a great curriculum. You can help curate an experience, around it. And then just in general, like, your flexibility with like, whether it's immersion or this and all that. So there's so many different facets that you do, but it's all around things you're passionate about.
That's true. And my love for the ocean. So I try to pick places that are close to the ocean.
Yeah, exactly. So how could somebody reach out and get in touch with you? What's that process look like?
Yeah, great. I have a website. It's www.create-connections with an S.net. So again, create-connections.net. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn as well, with Travel with Purpose. I have it as Travel with Purpose globally on Facebook, as well as Instagram. Or you can find Travel with Purpose globally, because there was somebody else had the name as well. So if you can't find it, add on the word globally.
Yeah, or Aileen.
Yeah, and the podcast is also on my website, so you can listen to the episodes there or on Spotify, or you can email me at aileenhale@gmail.com.
Wonderful.
If anybody reach out, if you're just wondering about a trip, I help with all the logistics. For a lot of people don't even know, even today, that you can go to Cuba and it is legal. So I can help you with all the visas and that information that you have questions like, where do I start? What do I need to know? The money exchange, all that kind of thing. I speak Spanish, so I have an easier way to facilitate connections, and again, find Airbnbs for you. They have a lot of, they call them casa particulares, where you can stay with families, which is another very meaningful way to build relationships in the community as well.
That's so wonderful. That's great. Well, we appreciate your time. On behalf of my sister, Allison and I, we're so glad you came here today to share, your background and your business, because I feel like anybody that listens to this is going to be inspired to have a more thoughtful, more purposeful vacation coming up, and reaching out to you is a great first step. So thanks so much for today. And I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you so much for the time to share with you all. And I have a lot to learn from you as well. So again, thanks for the time to participate.
Revel Coach is a collaborative platform that builds leadership programs for entrepreneurs, coaches, executives, and authors. For more information, visit us at revelcoach.com and follow us on LinkedIn to never miss an update.